A former WWE wrestler is found shot and killed. And then, months later, police make an arrest that just sends shockwaves through the community. The main suspect? You guessed it, his ex-wife. This is a story about love, loss, and a search for justice that is really just getting started.
And really, this is the question at the heart of this entire thing. How does a relationship that started all the way back in high school end up at the center of a murder investigation? It's a journey that goes from the classroom straight to the courtroom, and we're going to trace every step of how it all fell apart.
So before we get into the details of the crime itself, I think it's really important we understand who was lost here. The victim, he wasn't just another headline. He was a father, he was a mentor, and a really well-known figure in his community.
So, at just 41 years old, Kevin Nikel had built an incredible legacy. A lot of you might even remember him from his time in WWE's developmental brand NXT, where he wrestled under the name Knuckles Madsen. But, after his time in the big leagues, he came back home, and he poured all that passion right back into his community, founding both the Ozark Wrestling Academy and Ozark Mountain Wrestling. This guy wasn't just a former star, he was actively building up the next generation of athletes right in his hometown. And then, on July 11th, that life was just cut short. Nikel was found near Rogers, Arkansas. He had a gunshot wound to the abdomen. He was rushed to a hospital, but he was pronounced dead. And the whole community was just left reeling, trying to find answers.
The tragic irony of this entire case really lies in the relationship at its center. So when investigators started looking for a motive, they didn't have to look very far. Their search led them directly to the people who were closest to Kevin Nikel, starting with his ex-wife.
So on one side, you have the victim, 41-year-old Kevin Nikel, and on the other, the primary suspect, his 40-year-old ex-wife, Amanda Penny. But here's the detail that makes this whole thing so unbelievably heartbreaking. They were high school sweethearts. Their stories spanned decades, only to end in this absolute tragedy. And this is where things get really intense. Court records show that their divorce was finalized on July 8th. A mere 3 days later, Kevin Nikel was dead. That timing, that proximity is just a critical piece of this puzzle.
To really understand how this all escalated so quickly, we've got to look at the timeline. Let's see how a divorce turned into a homicide investigation and ultimately a pair of arrests.
Okay, here's the sequence of events. July 8th, the divorce is final. 3 days later, July 11th, Nikel is killed. But then, look at this. There's a 4-month gap where it seems like the case just went cold. What were investigators doing all that time? We don't know for sure, but on November 17th, they finally made their move.
So, who did the police arrest? Well, the investigation didn't just point to the ex-wife. It also pulled in another key person in her life, her new boyfriend. Right, so on November 17th, both Amanda Penny and her 51-year-old boyfriend Michael Hogue were arrested. They're facing charges of first-degree murder and, this is important, possession of a firearm by certain persons. Now, that second charge usually means that one of them has a prior felony conviction, which would make it totally illegal for them to own a gun in the first place.
This case was already just a tangled mess. But at the bond hearing on November 19th, it got even more complicated. Penny's public defender dropped an absolute bombshell in the courtroom. His client, the woman accused of murder, is 7 months pregnant.
The court's response to all this was pretty swift. The judge set Michael Hogue's bond at a staggering $750,000. A number that high tells you just how severe the charges are and that the court sees him as a potential flight risk. Amanda Penny's bond was also huge, $500,000. With bonds this high, it's pretty unlikely that either of them is getting out before trial. They're going to remain in custody, and the stage is now set for a really long and complex legal battle.
So, with 2 suspects behind bars, you might think the case is moving towards some kind of conclusion. But for Kevin Nikel's family, these arrests are just the beginning of their search for answers. They're still missing the most important piece of the puzzle, the full story of what actually happened.
And the reason they're so uncertain? Well, investigators have been, in the words of Nikel's own mother, very close-lipped. So while the police have their suspects, the family is still completely in the dark about the final moments of their loved one's life.
This quote from Susan Kinderman, Kevin's mom, it just captures the family's pain perfectly. The arrests, they bring a sense of progress, sure, but not closure. They just want to know exactly what happened to their son and who was the one who pulled the trigger.
And so that's where we are. We're left with a case that is just full of unanswered questions and some really tough moral complexities.
You have a pregnant woman and her boyfriend accused of murdering her ex-husband. As this whole thing moves toward a trial, the community is left to wonder, what does justice for Kevin Nikel, a community leader, a mentor, a father, what does that truly look like?